Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Fogartyville. Glad you're all here with us. Little introduction of who we are. We are a nonprofit community event space, live music venue. We are sponsored by WSLR, which is our community radio station, which is right next door. I hope you all are tuning in. It's 96.5 FM or WSLR.org worldwide streaming. Lots of awesome programming. We have great music, day, night, great special programming, health, social issues, art. You pretty much got it all. So please tune in, support us. We are member supported. So if you're not a member, please consider doing that. All our programmers are volunteers. And I want to introduce to one of our very special programmers who hosts Peace and Justice on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Mr. Thom Walker, come on up.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to see. Is this on? Yes, it is. I think it is. It's a real pleasure to see so many people turn out. It was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. We started a month and a half ago, and wow, I'm really impressed. John Nichols has been here before. 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and I think even before that. I've lost my piece of paper. Oh, wait a minute, I got it. I would tell you what books he wrote recently, where he went to school. What a great guy. He's always inspirational. Let me see, hold on. He lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and he works as an editor for the Capital Times there in the city. He's the Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine, and he's a regular contributor to In These Times and The Progressive. He's co-founder with Robert McChesney and Josh Silver of Free Press. And he's on TV all the time. The Ed Show, Ed Schultz on MSNBC, Up with Chris Hayes on MSNBC, Democracy Now! I heard him recently, Thom Hartmann, and so forth. And he's written a bunch of books, and these are really good books, very readable. His latest one was It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism. He wrote that with Bernie Sanders. But before that, there was a great one called The S Word, where he gives us the history of socialism in America. Great book. And then there was another one, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. Maybe that's what we'll talk about tonight. The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, the enduring legacy of Henry Wallace's anti-fascist, anti-racist politics. So he's my favorite intellectual. And and we need thinkers like him. He's always inspirational. Where are you, John?
I'm right here, brother.
Okay, come on.
Thank you, Thom. That's very good of you, brother. I'm told I'm supposed to.
Wait, everyone can see you.
All right.
Spotlights are on.
I am glad I'm not a drinker because I'd probably fall off the stage here. Well, first off, it's a lot better up here because I can't see any of you. And I know you're very attractive, but I'd be distracted. What an honor to be back at Fogartyville and to have, once again, just a fabulous crowd and great bunch of folks. A big round of applause for Thom Walker. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. Thom is, he is a habitual organizer. And that's, if there's anything you need, in these times especially, it's somebody who actually takes that seriously. And the thing about Thom is, if you say, well, this has got to be done, Thom's the one to say, oh, I'll go do it. And we don't have enough people like that. So I'm here to honor him and thank him for all of his good work. Is it Manny Lopez? Manny Lopez, who ran for Congress down here. 164,000 votes for common sense. Unfortunately, a few more votes for the other side. But Manny ran for Congress, and he ran on exactly the right message. He didn't prevail, but that has more to do with gerrymandering and a whole bunch of other issues than the sense of the issues he ran on. He ran on a simple, basic concept. You want to save Social Security in America? Make the rich pay their fair share. I'm honored to be with him, and I hope he didn't get the instinct beaten out of him, and I hope he'll run again and do even better next time, because we're going to need him. And I will tell you, Manny, this is the good news. I write about politics for a living. I've been writing about it for so long that I remember George McGovern, okay? So I've been writing about it for a very, very long time. I will tell you, it's countercyclical. When the other side wins and they get in there and they show you what they're about, 2 years later, shockingly enough, the good guys win. And so your chance is actually 2 years from now, brother. And I want to also give a big shout out, just to start out here, to Florida Veterans for Common Sense, a number of whom are here. Many of you know, because you've been around some of these things before, that I'm a huge fan of Thom Paine. And I think that Thom Paine is the one really redeemable founder. And look, I don't say that casually. I have a lot of respect for various founders of the American experiment. I think they all contributed something. But most of them had a fundamental flaw, and we should be honest about it. When you somehow see your way around human bondage, right, and you don't deal with that issue up front, when you're saying that all men are created equal, there's a challenge there. There is an issue to be discussed and thought about, although I don't think you can teach that in Florida. But the fact of the matter is that many of the founders themselves admitted that they had flaws. That's actually why they gave us the ability to amend the Constitution. If you read Thomas Jefferson's writings, he actually said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he said, if you required the people of the future to live under the rules that we wrote, you would be putting them in a straitjacket, and you would be undermining their ability to advance and progress as human beings. And so many of the founders knew their own imperfections. The one guy who didn't know his own imperfections was Thom Paine, because he was actually perfect. And I don't say that casually. Paine, the story of Thom Paine is so good that we'll tell it for just a moment here. Thom Paine was an Englishman, born in Norwich, Norfolk, in a relatively smaller town. Grew up in a Quaker family, and the Quakers always, tended to be a little bit more on the right side of history. And he became a tax collector. Now there's nothing less popular than a tax collector, right? I mean, you're not going to win a lot of friends there. But the thing that got him run out of England was not the fact that he was a tax collector. It was the fact that the king did not like the fact that Thom Paine organized a union of tax collectors. He was an actual union organizer in the 18th century. And he organized the tax collectors, tried to get them in a union, and suddenly he was like, you got to go. So they forced him out of England. He gets on a ship, and of course he's got no money, and he's a rebel and a troublemaker and everything. So he gets unbelievably sick on the ship. They're so sick they have to carry him off the ship into Philadelphia. They dump him in a rooming house with like 20 other people, and it should have been the end of history there, right? You forget about the guy. Except within a year, he had written the book that called the United States into revolution against the United Kingdom, Common Sense, for which Florida Veterans for Common Sense are named. And I believe to this day, King George and his descendants are upset with themselves for sending Thom Paine over to the United States, because if they hadn't sent him over to the United States, we'd still be speaking with English accents and drinking tea at 2 in the afternoon. So all power to Thom Paine, all power to Florida Veterans for Common Sense, and finally, all power to Fogartyville, which does such a great job of organizing events in this community. Just absolutely impressed with all the work that people do here. And I've been here, Tom, I think this is like the 4th or 5th time I've been here. My mother is 94 years old, and I've been coming here since my mom was a young woman, and charming everyone in the room. My mom has decided that she's not, she's good Wisconsinite, so she doesn't go to Florida in the winter. And so she decided she's sticking with the cold and snow in Wisconsin. But my wife, Mary Batari, is with us in the back of the room, so I've replaced my mother with my wife. And we keep it all straight. We keep it all straight by having everybody be named Mary. So, you've invited me to come and talk about politics. Whoa. All I can tell you is it didn't work out quite the way I had hoped this year. I think it's safe to say that the 2024 election was a wake-up call for everyone in America. Now, some of the people were woken up to the wrong message. There's no question of that. But I think we all realized that there was something afoot here that we should have been paying a lot more attention to. And this is, it's one of the complexities. I'm going to try and move my mic up just a teeny bit here. I don't know if I can pull it off. I'm going to try and see. Because now I'm going to get to the subtle point of this all. About 3 years ago, Bernie Sanders and I started working on a book about our moment, the moment we were in. And the senator and I have done a lot of projects together going back the better part of 30 years. And we've written a lot of things together. We've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of stuff. But the senator wanted to do a book that sort of spoke to the moment. And we wrote it, and it was a fun process. He's actually a really easy person to write with, and I think that was a decent part. But we came to the point where we had to pick a title, and we really wrestled with the question of what are we going to call this book? And we decided we're going to call it "It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism." And at the time, we thought, well, that's a catchy title. Right? That it would do okay. And it did. We put the book out, I think, in February of 2023. And in the first week out, it went to #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. One of the best-selling books in the United States. Senator's best-selling book. It was really my best-selling book by far. It was all this great stuff. And the only thing that stood in our way was Prince Harry, who had written this book called Spare, right? And so there we are. We're at #2 on the bestseller list, right? And we're like, okay, one more spot, and we get to #1. And Prince Harry would never get out of the way. And so I'm an anti-monarchist from way back. I don't favor royalty. And so the senator and I are going to write another book, and we're going to title it, "It's Okay to Be Angry About the Monarchy." However, there was one highlight of writing our book and having it come out at the time that it did, because it held that #2 spot, or a very high spot on the bestseller list, for quite a while. And somebody else wrote a book, another political player wrote a book, and tried to get up there to the top of the list. But Prince Harry, Senator Sanders, and myself, we held our line against him. And so Ron DeSantis did not get to the top of the list. But the thing about it is, I know this experience because I come from Wisconsin, where we elected Scott Walker governor a couple times. I know. And the interesting thing was, he also did not sell on the national stage at all well. In fact, he is now so forgotten and so dismissed that you can look ahead to where Ron DeSantis is headed, and it's encouraging. I believe that some philosophers have referred to it as the dustbin of history. Unfortunately, on the way there, he may serve as Secretary of Defense, because it doesn't look like Trump's whole project there of appointing people with drinking problems to have the nuclear codes is working out as well as some people might have hoped. But that's not my point. So we wrote this book, "It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism." And at the time, Senator Sanders and I wanted to argue not against capitalism altogether. We know there are responsible business people that run good businesses. Fogartyville is virtually a business, although in a nonprofit way. and wonderful. So there's wonderful people. There are good people to do that. Our point was that capitalism had gotten out of control, that we had created a situation in this country where a handful of billionaires literally can't lose money, right? It can't go bad for them. And what we were trying to emphasize is no matter what happened, the billionaires got richer. Not a little bit richer, a lot richer. And to give you an example, right, you have a war, billionaires get richer. You have peace, billionaires get richer. You have an economic upturn, billionaires get richer. You have an economic downturn, billionaires get richer. The country gets hit with COVID. We literally have a devastating health crisis, all these challenges. Billionaires didn't just get richer, they almost doubled their wealth during COVID. The rest of us are like, struggling to, try and find masks, right? And billionaires are getting dramatically richer. And in fact, during the period of COVID, the number of billionaires expanded. There were people, here we got folks who are literally risking their lives as essential workers for $7.25 an hour. And, Elon Musk is virtually doubling his wealth and inviting new billionaires into the club. And so what we said was, this is not a good arrangement. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to live in a country where no matter what happens, and the rest of us feel more insecure, more cut off, more denied, not just of economic power, but of political power that goes with it. Something it's okay to be angry about capitalism. We thought the operative word there was capitalism. We were wrong. The operative word was angry. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to understand the 2024 election, it's very simple. The 2024 election was the election of anger. Anger at the system, anger at how things work, anger at those who are in power and those who seek power. It was just flat out anger. And the interesting thing is, you can like him or dislike him. He's now your neighbor. He lives up the road. And Donald Trump understood that. And the Democrats did not. And that is a fundamental reality that explains an awfully lot about what just happened. And I'll talk about it a little bit here, and then we'll turn some lights up and take your questions. When I come here, always the best part of our being with you is that dialogue, that back and forth where you ask questions, give your ideas, I try to respond, then I turn to Thom to try and explain things. But this is an important thing to understand. It's a lot of way to point fingers of blame about the 2024 election. The mistake you make when you point fingers of blame about the 2024 election is that you point a finger at an individual, right? You say, well, Kamala Harris didn't get this right. Or Joe Biden, he didn't step down soon enough. Or Tim Walz turned out to be really folksy, but not as impressive as one had hoped in the debate with J.D. Vance. Or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can blame, blame, blame. And there are certain fundamentals that are legitimate to bring up. It is true that racism and sexism are a factor in our politics. And we need to understand that. And the candidate of the Democratic Party for President of the United States was a black woman who is a child of immigrants from India and the Caribbean. I've interviewed her many times. I can tell you a couple things about Kamala Harris. First and foremost, she was absolutely ready to be the President of the United States of America. And I'll tell you something else. She would have been one of the coolest, funnest, and best presidents of the United States in the history of this country. Tell you that? Guaranteed. I've spent enough time with her over the years to actually understand that. She's deeply involved with labor issues. She's deeply concerned about economic and social and racial justice. She had better views on a lot of issues than Joe Biden, although she didn't always express it as well or as fully as I would have liked. But the fact of the matter is, she would have been a great president. I have no doubt of that. However, she, in this campaign, was pressured to run a campaign that did not speak to the anger and the passion of the moment. And so she was out there talking about joy. And it felt good to many of us. It was nice to have someone talk about, getting beyond the hatred, getting beyond the division, getting to a point where we actually treated each other in a more humane and decent way. Yeah, it was very attractive, but it wasn't in touch with the moment that we were in. And so if you blame her, or if you blame Walls, or if you blame, anybody, you keep throwing blame around, you miss the deeper reality. The deeper reality is the Democratic Party wasn't in touch with the moment that we are in. And here's where I think it's important to understand that this isn't a new moment, right? This is something we've been in for a while. Can anybody except Tom name who was the last president of the United States who served a 4-year term, full 4-year term, with the Congress controlled by his own party? Who was the last president that did that? No. What? No, it's not that bad. Not Truman isn't that bad. Who'd you say? Johnson? No. Who said Carter? Okay, we got 2 Carters. You're the winners. It was Jimmy Carter. No, but think about that. Jimmy Carter's like 300 years old. And 100. And by the way, stuck around long enough to vote for Kamala Harris for President of the United States. Can you imagine that? It's pausing here for just a second. Jimmy Carter, born and raised in rural Georgia, born in the 1920s at a time when there were still Confederate veterans of the Civil War in his hometown, lived long enough to vote for a black woman for President of the United States of America. That is an amazing measure of our journey as a country. But Jimmy Carter's the last president who served 4 years with a party, with a Congress on his side. That has not happened since. And while some presidents have been quite effective in those 2 years, this is what I'm saying, all these presidents since then have only had 2 years in which to try and govern. Nobody's had a full term. And of the last 3 elections for President of the United States, 16, 20, 24, in each one of those elections, we turned out the party in power and flipped control of Congress. You understand? The last 3, 2016, right? You had Barack Obama, and Democrats were not in a great place in Congress, but they ended up, you picked Trump and a Republican Congress. 2020, you had Trump. Republicans were having a little trouble in Congress, but you ended up in 2020 picking Biden and a Democratic Congress. 2024, you turn out Biden's party and you put in a Republican Congress. So there was a split there in Congress, I understand. But you understand what I'm saying is we've had this chaotic situation. We've had a whipsaw politics. We go back and forth. Doesn't matter which party is in charge because it's going to get thrown out. And the reason for that is our governance is not working in a way that makes the majority of Americans believe that the country is on their side. Now, that's a fundamental reality. That's a whipsaw politics. Now, maybe that makes you feel pretty good because if you can hold your breath for 4 years, you're going to get a Democratic president. And Manny, that's good news for you. If you can get elected to Congress in 2 years, you can run for president and we'll have it all solved. But what I'm saying is the whipsaw politics, this nature of where we're at, isn't going to change until one party figures out how to deal with it, right? Figures out how to speak to the circumstance that we are in. And the problem of the moment is that Donald Trump and the Republicans, because they're very good at objecting to things, do better than they should, dramatically better than they should. And I'll give you an example of this. How many of you during the course of the campaign, and I can't really see you, but I'll just assume here, but how many of you during the course of the campaign thought that Donald Trump was absolutely nuts? Just crazy, right? I mean, I'm sorry. The 40 minutes spent dancing silently to the worst soundtrack in the history of America. I mean, he was going from YMCA to Ave Maria, right? And he's just standing there like this. And Kirsty Noem, the new Secretary of Department of whatever, what is it? Yes, Homeland Security. She's kind of trying to dance with him, and then he would stop, and she can't keep up with him. I mean, that was insane, right? Right, and then there was a debate, right? In the debate, and it's like they're eating the cats and the dogs. And you're like, what? And the whole thing was crazy, right? It was just beyond comprehension. You can't even begin to wrap your head around it, except for one thing. Being crazy angry was something that a true number of Americans, a huge portion, actually thought made a lot of sense, right? His craziness, his extremism, his out there character, the out there character of the campaign actually worked for him brilliantly. And the fact of the matter is that you can like it or dislike it, but you cannot deny the reality that a huge portion of people, many of them former members of the Democratic base, voted for Donald Trump. And why did they do so? Because to their view, the Democratic Party wasn't offering a sufficient alternative to what to just blow it all up, right? And so in this dynamics, if we talk about what to think about the 2024 campaign, what you have to recognize is that the Democratic Party itself has to go through a severe, deep reexamination. And it has to figure out, how are you going to talk to the great majority of Americans? And here's my first bit of advice. Don't start with Liz Cheney. Oh, it was madness. You know, I mean, I think we can all agree that Liz Cheney was very courageous when she broke with the Republicans and, you know, spoke out against Trump. That was great. It was wonderful. You know what you say to someone who does that? Thank you. And now we're going to go do some real politics over here. Because Kamala Harris went around this country appearing with Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney's name is literally associated, through her dad, I'll acknowledge, but is associated with illegal and immoral wars that did us no good. This is not a pain across the country with, because people actually they don't have a lot of memory, but they got that much memory. And there's actual polling that shows that among independent swing voters, when they were informed that Kamala Harris was supported by Liz and Dick Cheney, Harris's support level went down, not up. And so when Harris went around the country and appeared with Liz Cheney, she was harming herself rather than helping herself. That's dumb politics. Sorry. No, it's a big deal. And the fact of the matter is that the Democratic Party, in this point of great anger and great passion, went out there and said, you know what? We think that the voters that we really need to get are wealthy suburban women who usually vote Republican. And you know what happened there? The wealthy suburban women who were going to vote Democratic had already switched years before. They went to the Women's March in 2017. The rest of them weren't going to switch, and they didn't switch. So every minute spent on that kind of outreach was a wasted minute of a 107-day campaign. Harris had a very small amount of time to campaign for president. She wasted time with Liz Cheney and an outreach to conservative Republicans. It just didn't happen. Who didn't she talk to? Who wasn't? Now, it's not that Harris, again, I'm a fan. I'm not here to criticize. I'm just saying, who wasn't hearing a message that resonated for Kamala Harris? Working class people. And it's just that this is a fundamental reality. It's not that she didn't have some good ideas. She did. But when the funny thing is, a good idea cannot get through Liz Cheney. It's just, if Liz Cheney's sitting next to you, you're just not getting to where you need to be. And here's what happened in the 2020. Kamala Harris went across this country. Tim Walz went across this country. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on messages that basically told you Donald Trump is a bad guy. Everybody who thinks Donald Trump is a bad guy was already voting for them, right? So what you needed was a message that went beyond that. And what would your message be? Vote for me because I hang out with Liz Cheney? Or maybe, just maybe, wouldn't it have been a better message to say, vote for me because I hang out with Bernie Sanders? I don't say that casually. Do you know, in the United States of America, they do polling, and they say, who is the most popular political figure in the country. Among Democrats, the most popular political figure in the country, by far, the percent. The most popular political figure in the country with Democrats is Jimmy Carter. We love a 100-year-old guy. And that's great. It's wonderful. But Jimmy's not really quite as active in our politics currently. The number 2 figure on that list is Bernie Sanders. Number 2 figure with all Americans, not just Democrats, but all Americans. Of the Democrats, the number 2 figure is Bernie Sanders. You can like him. Yeah, you can applaud. You can like him. You can dislike him. I'm going to tell you something about Bernie Sanders. I know the guy pretty well. He's not totally charming. I mean, Bernie Sanders does not spend all of his time trying to be liked. He actually says things that piss people off a lot, and he sort of enjoys doing it. I don't know if you saw the interview. There was an interview recently with him. It was post-election, and the interviewer said, yeah, I know we talked about all this other stuff and about the economy and single-payer health care and, ending wars and doing all this good stuff. But I want to talk to you. There's some people that think Sonia Sotomayor is getting kind of old and she should resign from the Supreme Court to clear a place for somebody else. What do you think, Bernie Sanders? And Bernie Sanders goes, I don't think it's a good idea. And he said nothing else. And the host was like, so you're saying you don't think that's a good idea? And he says, yeah. And the host, still desperately trying to, provoke some controversy about something that nobody's talking about, goes, so you think Sonia Sotomayor should stay as a justice on the Supreme Court because she's the most progressive member of the court and because she actually writes brilliant decisions that challenge the right-wing drift of the extremists on the Supreme Court, and because she's actually in quite good health. She's got a little bit of diabetes, but who doesn't? And she says, and you think she should stay on the Supreme Court? And he goes, yeah. And that's the bottom line about Bernie Sanders. If you're trying to bring up something that he doesn't care about, he's not going with you there. And that's because he actually cares about one thing a whole lot: justice and inequality in America. And he thinks that we ought to have a system that errs on the side of the working class, not the billionaire class. And in an election where it turns out an awfully lot of people were really, really angry, and the people that were most angry were the working class, multiracial, multi-ethnic, Black, Hispanic, Native American, white working class, the whole bunch. There was a whole lot of anger there. Wouldn't it have been smarter to go hang out with the guy who's actually broadly identified as being on the side of the working class? So you want to understand 2024, it isn't all that complicated. Not that complicated. And Harris and Walz could have gone out with Shawn Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers Union, who has taken on corporate power and had incredible successes in doing so. And Shawn Fain was ready to go. But there wasn't room on the bus because Liz Cheney was sitting there. I mean, this is not complicated stuff, people. There's a way to figure this thing out. And the thing that is really most depressing and most difficult about the 2024 campaign is that despite what the media and Donald Trump said in the immediate aftermath of the election, Donald Trump didn't win by landslide. He didn't win by much. More than 50% of Americans voted for someone other than Donald Trump for president of the United States. Most Americans did not want him to be president. Now, more people wanted him than Harris by a very small margin, but most Americans, the majority of Americans, didn't want Trump. That's an important thing to understand because Donald Trump would tell you that he won the biggest landslide in the history of humanity. Right? That it was a mandate, profound mandate, everybody's for him, so the whole country's unified. Not the case. The reality is it's a tiny mandate. He got a lower percentage of the vote by a lot than Joe Biden in 2020. And if you'll recall, Donald Trump told us Joe Biden didn't win. He got way, way less of a percentage of the vote than Obama got. he got less of a percentage of the vote than George W. Bush. He got less of a percentage of the vote than George H.W. Bush, less than Reagan, less than Carter, less than Nixon in 72. You know what I mean? You just run through the list. Of all the elections since 1900, this was one of the 5 closest elections in that time. And the other ones were like Kennedy and Nixon in 60, where they both were virtually tied. Or Nixon and Humphrey in 68, again, very, very close. This was an unbelievably close election. Kamala Harris lost by about a little under 1.5% of the vote. Now that's a loss, no question of that, but it was an incredibly close loss. I know, it's depressing, isn't it? And here's the really depressing part. If she had lost by a lot, you could say, okay, that was just going to happen. When you lose by a little, then you realize that mistakes matter, right? And even in this whipsaw politics, right, where we whipsaw from one side to the other, that is the truth of our time. If you learn to unlock where people are at, you might be able to undo the whipsaw politics and actually get yourself into a position to win. The fact of the matter was, if we follow the political patterns, Trump was destined to win this year. Harris came within 1.5% of preventing him from getting to what he was destined to win. Why? Partially because Trump is, in fact, way out there, but also partially because of the mistakes that were made. And so if we put this all together, right, and if we let's recognize one other thing too. Donald Trump's mandate, we also think, okay, he did well in the presidential race, stuff like that. Electoral College, by the way, is one of the smallest in history. It's not one of the largest or anything like that. And control of Congress is like, they've got the Senate and the House. That is true. But they have the Senate, right, by a 53-47 split. That is one of the closest splits in history. And you have Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and amazingly enough, and I know you haven't ever applauded for this guy, Mitch McConnell, and several other people who really, really, really don't like Donald Trump in the Republican caucus. That does not mean they're going to reject all of his nominees, but that is why your fellow Floridian, Matt Gaetz, is not going to be the Attorney General of the United States. Now, admittedly, some other Floridian probably is going to be the Attorney General, because apparently you can't find any attorneys outside of Florida. But the important thing to understand is Trump has already started to run into trouble with the Senate, right? He has a very, very big problem, and we've been out here now for about a half hour or so, so it's very possible that his nominee for Secretary of Defense may have dropped out already, because that guy, it isn't looking good for that guy, right? I don't know about you, and I mean, really, it's wherever you're at on this issue, and I'm not a big prude or anything like that, but generally, if someone is revealed to have potentially a pretty severe drinking problem, I really don't know if I want that person making decisions about nuclear weapons and stuff. And I think, weirdly enough, there's quite a few Republicans who feel that as well. Now, I don't know how serious this guy's problems are, right? All I know is what I read every day in the media. Now, he says that he's really cleaned up, right? And that he's gotten a lot better. And his mom also says that he's better now than he was when she wrote the letter saying he's a horrible person. But when you put these things together, you end up in a situation where his nomination looks to be in a little bit of trouble. Now, I don't know where it's going to end up with some of these other nominees. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who really wants a vaccine anyway? And I mean, I personally like vaccines and antibiotics. But I know that's going to be an interesting nomination fight. There's going to be quite a few others. So at the end of the day, here's one of the things to understand. That narrower than you think Senate majority is problematic. However, even more problematic is the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives right now has a 220-215 split, right? Now, I don't know much about math, but it seems to me that if you're at 220, 215, and then Donald Trump, first off, Matt Gaetz is not going to serve in the next Congress because he already quit, right? I know, people are going to miss him. But he says he's on to a new career, and I think he really wants to be your governor. No, I'm not kidding. I mean, yeah, he'd probably prefer to take Rubio's Senate seat, but apparently that's going to go to Trump's daughter-in-law. I know, it's like, I like this woman over here because it's just like everything is, oh no, But there's some chance there but there's going to be some rearrangement if DeSantis goes off to run the Department of Defense, then Rubio goes to be Secretary of State, and there's a Trump as a senator, but there is still that governorship, and I think Matt Gaetz has got his eyes on it. And you know what? As many of you, won't make assumptions, but many of you are Democrats, I assume. And that, I'm telling you, if you're looking at your chances, the odds may be moving in your favor. But here's the deal. Matt Gaetz's seat is empty. There's another congressman from Florida who's going to depart and and probably get approved for a cabinet level post. And then you've got Stefanik from upstate New York, who's going to be the ambassador to the United Nations. And you know what I mean? They're kind of emptying out Congress, right? And so again, we're going to do our math here. But if you take the Gaetz seat and you take this other Florida seat, and then you take the Stefanik seat, right? You got at least 3 gone right there. 3 from 220 takes you down to 217. And 217 versus 215 gets you, it's 215, 218. I don't know where we're going to be at there. The math gets a little complicated. But we're down to a point where someplace in January, maybe February, there's a pretty good chance that 1 seat will assure the Republican majority. They will have essentially a one seat cushion on their majority. What that means is if you find 1 responsible Republican. Now, I know there's a guy up front, he goes, that's impossible. I disagree, comrade. I indeed believe there is 1 responsible Republican out there. But if you find 1 or 2 responsible Republicans, the House of Representatives becomes a chaos situation. So, bottom line, this is the thing to understand. The 2020 election did not create a mandate for Donald Trump. What it created was power. How that power is used and what will happen with it is in many ways up to you. It's up to the people of this country to say, Donald Trump, you're president of the United States. Unlike maybe unlike you, we actually accept the results of elections, but we don't believe that when you win a minority of the overall vote, when you have a narrow majority in the Senate and you have virtually no majority in the House of Representatives, that means you can do whatever you want. There have to be limits on you, and we push back. We demand that you govern with a respect for the whole country, not just for a part of it. Now, I'll acknowledge Donald Trump may not say, yeah, you're right, I hadn't thought of it that way. But your job is not just to talk to Donald Trump, it's to talk to members of Congress, including some of your own representatives, even the guy that ran against Manny. I know that may be hard. But also to talk to the American people and to put this thing in perspective. And so that's why I come to talk to you today. It's a simple, basic concept. If we understand the dynamics of where we're at, if we understand the mistakes and the challenges that the Democratic Party had, if we understand the whipsaw politics of our moment, we put this all in a mix, you shouldn't be as depressed as you are. And I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And I speak with no authority except to say that I cover politics for a living. And what I believe is that we are in a moment where if the Democratic Party gets its act together. And I understand that is like saying, if I become a major rock star and sell millions of records tomorrow. No, I know it's hard, but if the Democratic Party gets its act together, and if the American people begin to wake up to some of the dynamics of what's going on, especially if Elon Musk decides that he really does want to cut the veterans' health care budgets, and if he decides he really does want to cut Medicare and Medicaid, and if he decides he's going to somehow squeeze like trillions of dollars out of the federal budget on the backs of veterans and poor people and working class people, that's not going to last very long. That's not going to work very well. And as those moments come in, as this dynamic begins to come into perspective, I think there is a real chance. There is a real chance of two things. Number one, the possibility that Republicans lose the House before the end of this term, right? That they literally lose one part of their governing arrangement. And also the deeper possibility that enough members of the Senate push back against the worst of these nominees, and that you end up in a situation where it's politics, right? It's hard, it's difficult, but your political engagement matters, and that you're not pushed to the sidelines with no power and no way to have an influence, that in fact, your power and your ability to influence things is actually greater than at many times in history. And so if you take this moment and wrap your head around it and get engaged in trying to get ready for the next moment, 2026, 2028, our politics is full of possibility. But that possibility cannot handle any more dumb moves, right? Got to grow up. It's time to get serious. And growing up and getting serious is saying, number one, Liz Cheney, you are going to have to retire, right? You're off to the side. This whole notion of a Democratic Party that thinks it can't offend anybody, that it's somehow got to reach out to everybody and make everybody happy, that doesn't work in a period of deep anger. What works is a clear message. And the clear message is you're going to save, not just save, but expand Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. You're not going to reduce them. You're going to expand Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's the ask. You're not going to cut veterans' benefits. You're not going to cut veterans' medical care. You're going to expand it. And frankly, if we're going to expand these things, maybe we really expand it and we start talking about the thing that does help to balance budgets, and that's creating a single-payer Medicare for all healthcare system that serves all Americans without profits for multinational corporations. And frankly, that's just the beginning. There are so many areas of intervention that if progressives keep their voices up and keep their voices loud and are willing to say that we're not satisfied either. We're not trying to defend the status quo. We're not going to try to tell people to feel okay about inflation or to feel okay about economic challenges. What we're saying is Donald Trump is a billionaire who is about to cut taxes for billionaires. We are the people who say it's okay to be angry about capitalism and it's okay to be against the billionaire class. And I'll just tell you, I'll close off here and then take some of your good questions. Let me just close off with this simple message here. Our media absolutely does not know how to and is unwilling to cover politics. It covers gossip. It's great on gossip, right? We were just talking about the nominee for Secretary of Defense. I don't know what kind of problems that guy has. And I don't want to even beat up on him about that. I don't want the reason he doesn't become Secretary of Defense to be the fact that he has some personal problems. As New York Times, everybody's all obsessed with that. What I want is the reason he doesn't become Secretary of Defense is because he's not qualified to hold the post, right? He hasn't done all of the things that you would hope you would do before you get there. He has a military record that I honor him for. No reason not to, absolutely. But there's more to it than that. I want Congress to analyze these things, to treat it all seriously. And at the end of the day, I want a media in this country that actually goes to the heart of the matter. And in covering politics, you have to get beyond the gossip and get to the reality of what's going on. We tend to get a media that tells us that we should think about politics about who we like and who we don't like. That's not what politics is. Politics is about what you need out of your government and how you think your government should be organized. And Democrats have to stop saying, like us, and start saying, here is what we're going to do for you when we get power. It is a fundamental difference in the calculation. And so I know that this is possible because I've seen it happen. I actually cover politics, and I've done it for a very, very long time. And you know what the fundamental reality is? We keep changing as a country because we keep looking for better. And some of the worst setbacks for the Democratic Party have been followed by some of the biggest victories. Remember, in 1972, George McGovern got 37% of the vote for President of the United States. Now, the fact of the matter was George McGovern was a fantastic human being. He was a World War II hero who had literally, spent much of his lifetime trying to end poverty and end hunger. He was an opponent of the Vietnam War, which was the right thing to be. He was a supporter of civil rights and women's rights and so many. He was an excellent human being, but he just couldn't beat Richard Nixon. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's it, man. Democrats ran an excellent human being for President of the United States. They got wiped out. They're done. They're finished. 4 years later, Nixon is thrown out of office, forced out of office, and the Democrats win the presidency and near record majorities in the House and Senate, right? This is how politics works. It works this way all the time. Joe Biden, just 4 years ago, won the presidency, House, and the Senate, right? And he's gone now. And, we've gone another route. The thing to understand is you whip back and forth, and if you do understand that, instead of being depressed, you ought to be energized. And you ought to be asking yourself, who is the next Democratic president of the United States going to be? Not just what do we have to do now in this moment, but where are we headed? And that's where it gets exciting. Because the fact of the matter is, and I no insult to anyone in this room, and actually, nice thing is I know none of you are anywhere in this zone, but maybe it's time to stop nominating 80-year-olds. Now, I am not against 80-year-olds. I myself plan to be one. And it's coming quicker all the time. But what I will tell you is this. The Democratic Party needs a new generation rising up. And that new generation is rising up right now. The next chair or the next ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee is going to be Jamie Raskin. There you go. And I'm a huge fan of Tom Paine, by the way. He's got quotes on his wall in his office. The next ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee is going to be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There is a rising generation coming up. All of these House committees, you're going to see a lot of change taking place. I am not in the camp that says you force out every older person. I don't like that. I don't believe in that. But what I do believe is that at some point you have to make room for a rising generation. The fact is the rising generation is coming. It's showing up. You're seeing it in the rearrangement of the House right now. You're going to see it in the rearrangement of the Senate. And you are going to see it in the Democrats who start running for president. And I'm not in this camp that says, oh, we shouldn't start early. I think it's fine to start running against the Republicans right now. And I think some of the people that are stepping up are some of the most interesting people I have seen in our politics. Now, I'm not a total fan of his, but I kind of enjoy Gavin Newsom trying to get out there and make some noise and try and shake things up. Like what he's doing out in California, right? I'm thinking Gretchen Whitmer, if she wants to make her play, that's just fine by me. I think she's a really incredible person. Have you been watching Chris Murphy out of Connecticut? He stood up and he said the party's got to get way better on economic issues. Very interesting figure. The fact of the matter is there's about a dozen Democrats who are starting to think about running. And as long as they don't spend all the time they're running and some of the time on doing a critique of Donald Trump and organizing and getting people together to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't do so much damage, they're going to end up in a situation where they will have united the people, enough people in this country, to put this moment, and it is a tough moment, it is a depressing moment, I understand that, but we can begin the turn to put it behind us. And brothers and sisters, I promise you, I will come back to Fogartyville 4 years from now, and we will be talking about a transformed and dramatically better and dramatically more hopeful America. I believe that is possible if you'll just stick with me during these next 4 years. Thank you very much. Where did all these people come from? Oh my gosh. Do you know what? I got to tell you, can I just say when they turned the lights on there, I didn't, because when I got up here, not all the seats were filled. When you turn the lights on, do you ever see the movie White Christmas? Yeah. Right? When at the end they open up the door and it's snowing outside and everything's all great? You're my White Christmas. So let's do a few questions here. It's yep. It's a decent time.
We're going to open up the floor to questions, but we might not be able to hear you, so I'm going to run around. There's also a microphone up front with Thom if you guys want to stand there, but we want to make sure that you're heard.
Hey, thank you for all that great information.
Hey.
One of the things that struck me that you said is how Donald Trump, despite his landslide rhetoric, he didn't have a majority of the vote.
Nope.
I remember when Bill Clinton won, he only got 42% of the vote.
You're right.
And he was flogged by Republicans because he didn't have a majority. So I'm sitting here wondering, would we ever see the Democratic Party do that? And
so let me just pause you, and I want to hear the second part of your question.
Okay.
Flog away.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
No, look, this is important. It is important for Democrats to say this, and I know they're not very good at this.
No, they're
But it is important for them to say this because this is where you start to speak to the Republicans in the House and the Senate. You know, the genius of the American experiment, it has many flaws, but the genius of the American experiment is that we have regularly scheduled elections. There's a whole bunch of Republicans that are looking at 2026 already. And what you want to say to them is, do you really want to side with the guy who didn't win the majority of votes? Or maybe do you want to side with where the great majority of Americans are on issues like health care for all, saving Social Security, saving Medicare, saving Medicaid, saving veterans benefits, things like that. It's where we open up this flogging away, if you will, is where we open up the politics. Sorry, the second part of your question.
Okay. So 2 years later, the contract with America, why can't, and I know I was in sales for 20 years, and it is painful for me to watch the messaging of the Democratic Party. It is full of subliminal no's instead of yeses. It's just got a lot of problems. Why can't the Democratic Party create a new contract with America and take over the House with the expanded programs you're talking about and talking to the working class? And who's in charge anyway? But would they do something like that? Because I think it would be transformative. Like
you are great. And
well,
I promise you that I didn't put my sister here to ask these questions, because you're spot on. You went right to the heart of the matter. And that subliminal thing you just mentioned, the subliminal message of no, that is, in fact, painfully a reality of the Democratic Party for a very, very long time, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. And I know people may be divided on this issue, and I respect divisions on this issue. People may be divided on this issue of Israel and Palestine, of Gaza. And I will tell you that here's the fundamental reality of that issue. Joe Biden, as President of the United States, says, I really don't want Netanyahu to do this. And yet we keep providing Netanyahu with the weapons to do it. That looks weak, right? It looks like you're not, the most powerful country in the world cannot even affect one of its closest allies on a fundamental question. And so again and again and again, the Democrats come off looking weak and dysfunctional rather than bold and strong. And you'll notice I just went through that issue without taking a particular stand, not making people take one side or the other. But the fact of the matter is that the message that is communicated is a horrible message, right? Because you have awful things happening and somehow nothing happens about it. So that happens again and again and again in our politics. So you're right about the subliminal thing. Now, can the Democrats get their act together? Well, here becomes a fundamental issue on Democrats getting their act together. They're about to elect a new chair of the Democratic National Committee. That will be one of the strongest faces of the Democratic Party going forward. And I will tell you, the general model of the Democratic National Committee for the last decades has been, we would like to pick the most boring person we can possibly find, right? You know? And if it's possible that they're not good public speakers, that's even better. And, you know, primarily what we'd like them to do is raise some money, but not do anything interesting possible. And it has not worked. It has not worked. You know, the fact of the matter is that in this case, where Democrats have to have as many possible spokespeople as they want, they need a chair of the Democratic National Committee who can go on television every night of the week and take apart the Trump agenda and put out a progressive agenda, an alternative agenda. And so I'm not even here to tell you who to vote for head of the, you know, or who you might want to support. But I would tell you this. What's that? Ben Wickler from Wisconsin? My goodness. Goodness me. I didn't know Wisconsin was going to come up. But Ben I've known for a very, very long time, and I think he's a pretty remarkable guy. And he's one of the candidates running. But I'm willing to let the other candidates be better if they are. The fact of the matter is, though, this is your bottom line. The next chair of the Democratic National Committee should be able to message better than all of the previous chairs combined. It's a baseline requirement. It's got to be somebody who can get out there and do the job, because the Democratic brand at this point is dramatically ill-defined. People don't know what that brand is. They don't know they don't know where it's at, right? And so if you pick a chair, pick somebody who can actually speak to it, right? Who can actually give you some clarity there. And so the answer is we will see, because they're going to choose a chair in February, right? And again, I'm not here to tell you who to support. I'm just here to tell you that it better be somebody who's really, really good at messaging, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of people don't have a sense of what Democrats are anymore, right? It's been so gray and so ill-defined. And so there is a challenge here. There is a need to get that definition. Where that definition comes from, you know, and who it is, I hope it comes from a lot of different places. But I hope there is a measure of unity, right? Some message unity on it. And I hope that it comes, and this is my bias, and I hope it comes with, in many cases, a younger, more female, and more working class face than the party has had for quite a long time. Multiracial, multi-ethnic, female, young. I'm not saying that's what it all should be, but I think that should be a big part of it.
Okay, we have a question over here with Joe.
Thank you so much, John. The question I have is, could you give us a little historical context on the difficulty of a vice president running against the incumbent?
Yeah.
And you know, the famous quote we all heard on The View is that she couldn't think of anything. And then that goes to your point of not tapping into the anger, because she's not drawing a distinction. Can you give us some talking points around that one?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how many of you were alive in 1968. I was. And Hubert Humphrey ran for president of the United States. Hubert Humphrey was an incredibly great guy. He really was a great man. There's this sort of a re-examination of Hubert Humphrey going on right now. There's a couple new books about him that are fabulous. And one of the things that they point out was that in 1948, at the Democratic National Convention, he got on that stage and he said, doing the minority report, not the majority report on the platform, we have to put a civil rights plank in this platform because we've got to get out of the darkness of states' rights and into the sunshine of human rights. That was Hubert Humphrey. Right side of civil rights decades before the country got on the right side of that issue. Great man. Unfortunately, he was Lyndon Johnson's vice president. He inherited the presidential nomination when Lyndon Johnson stood down because the Vietnam War was becoming so unpopular that Johnson had doubts about whether he could get reelected. So he steps down on, I think it was March 30th, April 1 of 1968, and they hand it off to Humphrey. They push aside Gene McCarthy and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Humphrey becomes the nominee. And Humphrey never sufficiently distanced himself from Lyndon Johnson on Vietnam. And what happened? And now at the end of the campaign, he actually got a little better on the issue, but not good enough, not strong enough. What happened was Humphrey lost the presidency in 1968 by less than 1 vote per precinct. You understand that? He lost the presidency by less than 1 vote per precinct. If he had been elected president of the United States in 1968 as a candidate who was ready to end the war in Vietnam, we would have saved thousands of lives in this country and hundreds of thousands of lives in Vietnam and in Cambodia and other places. But more than that, we would have maintained the war on poverty. We would have begun to do all of the things that we have not done yet on issues like health care and civil rights and economic rights in this country because Humphrey was ready to do it, and he could have carried on what Johnson was doing on domestic. So the historical lesson's pretty powerful, isn't it, my friend? Right? You have to distance yourself from the candidate, from the president who's sitting there if you're the candidate to replace that president, because if that candidate stood down because they thought they couldn't win, maybe there's a reason that they thought they couldn't win. And it might not just be personalities. It might not even be Joe Biden's age. And I always thought that was a little unfair to him because he had a bad debate. But the fact of the matter is Biden is still doing a lot of competent things. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not a little bit dubious on the pardon stuff. But the bottom line is that I think that Biden realized that he was in a very weak place politically. He stood down. Kamala Harris came in. The first thing she should have done is sit down and say, where am I going to break with Biden? Where are the issues where I'm going to suggest I'm going to do things differently and better, right? Now, you may think Biden was perfect. He did everything right. That may be a little painful, but the fact of the matter is the American people weren't quite there. And so you needed to evolve. I think she should have evolved on Gaza. I think she should have taken a stand that was much more committed to achieving peace in that part of the world. And I also think she should have evolved, frankly, on a host of economic issues. It isn't that Biden was bad on economics. He was good on a lot of it, but here's the problem. Joe Biden had to compromise because of Manchin and Sinema. He didn't deliver all the things that he said he wanted to do. Kamala Harris should have been out there saying, yes, I will deliver on those things. Give me the presidency and give me a House of Representatives, a Congress. I'll do it. That doesn't work when you say I agree with everything Biden's doing. So it was problematic, right? And here's the bottom line thing of it. Kamala Harris was a wonderful vice president because she was loyal to her president, right? But when you become the presidential nominee, and I don't say this casually, you have to be loyal to yourself, right? You got to be loyal to the campaign that you're in, because your campaign is not to maintain the legacy of the person before you. It is to establish the legacy going forward if you win the presidency of the United States. And so that was that's a problematic part of this whole thing.
Okay, right over here.
Oh, gosh, me.
I wish I could see you better.
So, hi, I'll stand up.
Oh, good.
I'm much taller now.
Yeah, now you're
that's
you're
great.
towering over your chair. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So, I've been watching with some mix of horror and fascination the response to the killing of United Healthcare
Yes.
CEO. And I've seen people online comparing it to the guillotine, the French Revolution. Yeah. And I suspect that some of the people who are saying this, who are celebrating this, voted for Trump. And I suspect that some of them weren't paying attention to what Trump said he was going to do with health care. And I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on the rage of the masses that expresses itself with joy over a folk hero, perhaps rather than a vote.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Look, some of you know this, some don't. I'm a Quaker. And the Quakers are a very small religion that sees the light of decency and humanity in every person, even in people we fundamentally disagree with, and even in people we think are doing a lot of harm. And so as a Quaker, I can't celebrate violence and gun violence and shooting people on the streets. And I don't think, to me, it's very, very discomforting. Look, this is the bottom line. Do you really want to live in a country where we solve our political problems and our policy problems with weapons, right? I don't. I don't want to see that, and it pains me, frankly, that's where we're at. Now, you ask a question about how people have this sort of unbridled rage, right? And again, as somebody who co-wrote a book about being angry about capitalism, I think it's great to be angry about capitalism. I just don't think you should be doing it with guns. I think you should be doing it with votes. And I think that the fact of the matter is that when you frame a politics that deals with these challenges, I think you reduce the threat of violence. You reduce some of that anger, some of that tension. But you do have to address it, right? This is the bottom line. I believe in a single-payer Medicare for all healthcare system where everybody gets the healthcare they need when they need it at no cost, right? You don't get charged at the point of getting your care. Now, that may sound like a radical idea, except for this one little subtlety. It's what they do in pretty much the rest of the world. And you know what? With all the challenges in Canada and all the challenges in Norway and all the challenges in Sweden and Finland and Germany and Ireland and the United Kingdom and France and Italy, and then you start moving out into Japan and you move into Australia, you start going around the whole world. Any country that can do it does a healthcare system where healthcare is delinked from profit and linked to the basic premise that healthcare is a right. And I think if you put that on the table, right, if you put that on the table as your goal, I think that you give people a lot more to focus on there rather than focusing on violence. And believe me, this country doesn't need any more violence. I'm sorry. You look. Oh no! I thought I heard you clear. I heard you totally clear. I'm with you in that we shouldn't be doing this. And I actually know there's probably somebody that disagrees with me, right? I'll take that hit because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, there's too much gun violence in this country. There's too many quote unquote problems that are solved with violence. It's not where you want to go, and especially in a volatile moment like this, I don't think it's a healthy way to end up. That's my politics, and I speak as a Quaker, and so I know that I always put that as my baseline. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because that was actually one of the things I was going to raise. Mm-hmm. As you were talking about the anger in the public, that animus, that's the thing. There's so much animus. Now is the time, if not now, when? Single-payer health care now. That's what we've got to launch around the country. The Democratic Party has got to make that a #1 priority. They have to make living wage. Workers need a major raise. In fact, most American workers need to be making twice what they're making. Mm-hmm. We need affordable housing. We need to lower the mortgage rates. These are things. We need single-payer health care. We need paid family leave.
Are you announcing your candidacy?
Actually, I am running for state committee this week.
Very good. All right. There you go.
I want to bring this up. We're listening.
Yes.
Millions and millions of dollars were spent on consultants who don't know squat
Yep.
They've never been out there organizing. I mean, we have people here who've been organizing for 60 years and more.
Sure.
And that's who they need to listen to, the activists. And that's what we got to get going here. But right now is the time to really be pushing, launching single-payer health care. And here in Florida, we also got they don't like insurance companies, homeowner insurance companies either.
I know, yeah.
So that's another one that we can really use here. And it's only going to get worse because, of course, they're climate deniers.
So let me take all the good things you're saying here and bring it to, I agree with all the stuff you're saying, double. And I hope your candidacy goes well for the state committee. And not because I know you, but because the issues you're focusing on are the ones that need to be in the mix. But I will tell you there's one issue that comes before everyone that you just mentioned. Hate to say it, because you're so right on all these things. There's one issue that comes before everyone that you just mentioned, and that's campaign finance reform. Because the reason the Democratic Party is not good on all these other issues is because the Democratic Party has got a little bit of that money disease, right? There's this desire to raise money, and the fundamental reality is that so much is sacrificed on the altar of capital that we end up not being able to function on every other issue. And there has to come a point where the Democratic Party, look, I favor multi-party democracy. I'm glad if there was another party. But the fact is, we're pretty much in a two-party system now. There's got to be a point where one party says that if we win, it's going to be tougher for the billionaires and the corporations and all of those who are powerful and lobby and fill our halls with, ex-members of Congress demanding things of us because we're going to side with the people. Now, the Republicans get away with that now because it's such a gray zone between the parties. But I will tell you this, if the Democratic Party had run in this last election on single-payer Medicare for all health care, right? Everybody in, nobody out, of course the Republicans would have attacked them. But do you understand the clarity that would have come from that? That clarifies the whole debate. If you say that if we are elected, it's a political party, if you say if we are elected above that 107,000 or whatever that amount is, right? If you're making above that amount, you're paying taxes on all of it into Social Security, right? Now we have a system where if you are wealthy and you're above a certain point, you don't have to pay any taxes, right, into Social Security. That's ridiculous. We ought to tax the billionaires in order to secure Social Security and to make sure that Medicare and Medicaid are functional going forward. You say that on the campaign trail, and you understand how clear the whole rest of it gets. Let's take some more questions.
Hi.
Hey.
By the way, Robin and we've been organizing for over 50 years together.
So does that mean that
in
you're
New
100
Jersey.
years combined?
Yeah, I guess
All
that
right.
means it.
All right.
My question is, I think you're very spot on in terms of the new generation.
Thank you so much. You can sit down.
But I also think another big part of it is that we need a real mass movement, a national mass movement. And now Bernie tried to do that with Our Revolution, which I was involved with, but it kind of fizzled. So how can we get that national movement going again? Because I don't see much happening right now.
Well, one of the things that we've realized, and this is, often you have progressive candidates for president, right? You had Jesse Jackson in 1984 and 1988, and he started the rainbow, but it never really became that full, powerful influence on all of our politics. What's that? Oh, I don't know about that. I've known him for a pretty long time, and I think that it would have been a lot easier for him to be on the other side of issues like war and peace and labor unions and economic and social and racial justice. But the bottom line is that didn't come to fruition too much. Our revolution didn't really come to fruition too much. And many other candidates have run campaigns. And I think the thing that I would suggest to you is that if you're going to build a movement, right, that the movement that you build, and we got to get our phones under control here, but if you're going to build a movement, the movement that you build has got to be rooted not in an individual, right, and not in the play out of a campaign, but in an issue, right, or in a set of issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm excited by the renewal of the labor movement, right? I'm glad that the labor movement is stronger than it was, and I hope it continues to get stronger. I hope that I would like to see a much stronger anti-war movement in this country and a movement for reducing the military budget, because I think we put way too much into the military budget. And I would like to see, I mean, this is like simple stuff, but it's stuff that's undone. We still haven't fully locked in the Equal Rights Amendment, right? Basic women's rights. And so I think that movements based on issues are much more likely to be what we want. And if you can coalesce people, right, around those issues, that's where you really get places. And so I guess that's my answer to you. Now, I know people that are working with Our Revolution right now. And I know people that are working with Progressive Democrats of America, and I know people that are working with other groups. And frankly, I think they're doing a lot of good work, right? I think there are people out there. It's just that at this point, I would argue that a focus on issues is the better way to get to where you want to go. There's always going to be personalities out there, but there has to be something permanent that, you know, no matter who is the nominee, no matter what's going on, you're going to make your demands. And so that's what I would suggest. Let's take a couple more questions, and then we'll get you out to see the remains of the Christmas parade.
I think that
I can't believe all of you people skipped the Christmas parade to do that.
Yeah, over here.
Okay.
Over here.
Yeah.
This whipsaw politics is not working. Both the Republican and the Democratic parties are not really serving the needs of American people. Right. And I think it's because of some reasons. Where you touched on the finances. Our politicians are too beholden to money. We have gerrymandering.
Yep.
And on top of that, we don't get quality candidates. The only qualification you need to be a U.S. president is to have a pulse and be born in America. You don't even need to know anything about civics, history, geography. We need to have qualified people and correct the money problem. I'm wondering, in your opinion, short of a revolution, how can we fix this?
Haha, very good question. Do you know, that's a superb question, because there does come a point where people start to ask themselves, you know, with all these challenges, with all the chaos of it all, the chaos of our politics, I mean, is there a way to get out of this within the dynamics of the current system? And the fact of the matter is the current system is stacked against democracy. The current system is a mess. Let's be honest about that. We have a United States Senate where somebody elected from Wyoming with 60, 70, 80,000 votes can cancel out the vote of somebody elected from California with 7 or 8 million votes. We have a situation where you can lose the Electoral College and still win the presidency of the United States. We have all sorts of barriers to democracy in our politics, and the biggest barrier, I would argue at this point, is that combination of gerrymandering and money in politics, even as bad as the other things are. So do we need absolute small d democratic reform? Yes, without a question. But to get to that small d democratic reform, short of a revolution, right, is to have a political revolution, i.e., to have somebody win power or some party win power sufficiently so that it can actually govern. And the only way you get out of the whipsaw politics, in my view, is to take a clear enough stand on the side of the people that you actually unite enough of them to win elections by big margins. Can that happen? Is it possible? I don't know, except here's the interesting thing. The worst setbacks for Democrats consistently in American modern history, the worst set of setbacks were in the 1920s. In 1920, Warren Harding won, I believe, 62% of the vote. In 1924, Calvin Coolidge, in a three-way race for the presidency that had a Democrat and Robert M. La Follette, the progressive, won the overwhelming majority of the vote. Huge, sweeping victory. In 1928, Herbert Hoover won a landslide victory as a Republican. The Republicans won again and again and again, and they screwed things up so badly that in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt came and won by one of the biggest margins in history, only to be superseded by his re-election margin in 1936 when he said, and I will count, you say, because we're going to say, you're saying to me, well, yeah, but that's ancient history. Except for one thing. In that ancient history, they actually knew how to talk about economics. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for re-election as President of the United States in 1936, 2 days before the election, he appeared at Madison Square Garden at a huge rally, and he said, we've made some progress on the economy, but not enough. I'm being opposed in this election by the bankers and by the speculators and by the wealthy and by the economically powerful, and you know what? I welcome their hatred. That was the President of the United States saying he welcomed the hatred of the economic elites in the country. And you know what the American people did? They gave him the largest landslide in American history. And so my answer to you is, short of that revolution, let's actually try going out and doing an economic populist politics that speaks to addressing the fundamental questions that this woman raised on getting to single-payer health care, getting to doubling the wages, getting to expanding Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, getting to expanding programs. Let's see if you can win on that promise, and maybe we won't need a revolution, because maybe we'll have a political revolution that will deliver the country to where it needs to be, and then we can do those reforms on all these other issues. Let's take one more
We're
question.
going to take one more question up front somewhere. Here we go.
There we go. Hey.
How do you believe the Democratic Party handled the single issue of immigration, which seems to have been a really hot number?
Was it, I mean, do you think of it, and tell me, you can do it by applause or whatever, raise your hands. Was it a big issue in Florida? Was it an important issue? You say no, by and large. I'll tell you, in Wisconsin, where I live, they did everything they could to make it a big issue, but it wasn't the biggest issue. You know, it's an interesting thing on immigration. I think immigration is a challenging issue because we've had both parties fail on it again and again and again. I think this country benefits by immigration. I think having immigrants come to this country, because I have to be for it, because I'm from an immigrant family. My people came here in 1828 from Cornwall, because the tin mines ran out and they wanted to mine lead in southwestern Wisconsin. And they didn't come for all sorts of noble reasons, and they were pretty much ne'er-do-wells, and they drank a lot, and they had a lot of problems. But they came to America, and, you know, here I am, right? So the fact of the matter is, I think an awful lot of immigrants now are coming for much better reasons than my ancestors did, but pretty much the same baseline concept of that they're looking for work. And they were looking to contribute. And so I think what you need, and the answer in my mind is, we need a rational system that lets people do that, right? That makes it more humane and functional for the people who are coming to this country, right? And makes the whole system work in a way that's logical. Not to be anti-immigrant, but to make it work, right? And the fact of the matter is, and this is one where I think it gets to the heart of the issue. Joe Biden was an imperfect president. He didn't do everything right. But one of the things that he, and amazingly enough, one of the most conservative members of the Republican Party tried to do was immigration reform just this year. They actually had it proposed. And Donald Trump said, no, don't do that, because I want to use this issue. And so at some fundamental level, the answer on immigration is that we have to have people courageous enough in both parties to step up and actually do a rational, humane immigration reform. Are we going to get there easily? Probably not. The sad part is that the exploitation of immigration as an issue now is so locked in that I think what you're going to have to do is get to that same answer that I have for this other guy here, that you've got to get to a point where one party has enough power, it really is in charge and can do the reforms. Because bipartisan things have unfortunately have run into an awful lot of trouble. And I guess one thing I'll say, though, about the immigration issue, for what it's worth, and this is also about another issue that they put out a lot with a lot of these anti-trans ads, and stuff like this. There's an interesting thing in the polling that came out of the election. What it showed, at least in some of the research that was done by the Harris campaign, is that the ads that were most effective were the Bidenomics ads. They weren't the trans ads, and they weren't the immigration ads. Most of those ads were based on keeping the Republican base together, right? Keeping their people excited. The ads that actually appeared to have moved people were the ads that said the economy's not good. Even though the economy's, we have high employment and all this stuff like this, those were the ads that appear to have resonated with the potential swing voters. And we cannot like that. Maybe you can even say, well, that's not fair to Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, that's where voters were at. And so I think that the answer in many ways to the immigration issue and all these other issues that the Republicans have pushed out in so many ads and in so many attacks, I think the answer is to turn that volume way up on economic fairness. Turn that volume way, way up on taxing the billionaires, on making Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid stronger than they've ever been, on getting us a health care system that works for the vast majority of Americans, on raising wages, on strengthening unions. And I'll close off with this one thing because I'm very pro-union. I'm like ridiculously pro-union, so take it for what it's worth. One of the biggest problems that the Democratic Party had in 2024 was that young men didn't vote Democratic at the level that young women did. Yeah, there's actually a gender divide that developed among young people, and the young men were just not as enthusiastic as they had been in the past. There were clearly, there's something that had changed. Were they less pro-choice? No. Were they less, supportive of a lot of the issues and values that the Democratic Party is associated with? No, that hadn't changed. But they were feeling precarious. They were feeling scared about the future. They were feeling scared about economics. There's a lot of evidence of that. Do you know what the number one thing, what young men love more than just about anything else? Young women, yeah, maybe, okay, I respect your statement there. But I'm not sure you're right. No, you know what young men really love on the list of political issues? Unions. Unions poll at around 90%. If you ask young people, what do you love? They say, I love the idea of being in a union. Why? Because in this insecure, unstable, post-COVID moment where everything seems to be, kind of out of sync and nothing locks in, and I don't have any kind of clarity or any sense that something protects me, I think being in a strong union that negotiates on my behalf, that will matter in my life. That's what young people believe according to the polling, and I believe that if the Democrats had run in 2024 saying, if you elect us, we're going to remove the barriers to unionization. We're going to make it possible for people in every state in this country, if they want to be in a union, to join a union, to organize their fellow workers, and to collectively bargain for better pay, better benefits, and a better place in our society. If you had said that, I think the Democrats would have won a lot more young people, and I think they might well have won the presidency and the Congress. So let's take that chance, and let's not get lost in all the issues that the Republicans want to talk about. Let's start talking about some issues that could fundamentally change lives, and I would start by saying, give everybody a chance to be in a union, and you watch how many people switch their vote over to the Democratic side. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Jon Nichols, everyone, Fogartyville. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's very nice of you.
Thank you, John.
Hey, I'll tell you what.
Come back in 2 years.
I'll tell you what. Everybody, if you stand up, I want to take a picture of you.
Great.
Not
Everybody
kidding.
stand up.
This is what I want to do. Oh, maybe turn the lights on better here. Just a second. I'll tell you. Oh, look at this crowd here. Hey. Oh my gosh, look at this crowd. All right, I'm gonna do just a little. You can say whatever you want.